You got the clicker.
Okay, thanks. Here we go.
Thank you, Lisa. Just a couple of announcements before we do our next speaker. In the lobby area here is a whiteboard, and on it is called Optional Group Activities. So if you have something you're doing on Friday afternoon or Saturday, and you want others who might be interested to participate with you, just list it, and people can sign up for those activities. And secondly, and really importantly, is all the sessions here are being recorded and will be available to you on the website for use in your district with your staffs when you go home. That's why it's important that you wait for the mic when you speak or ask a question. Our next speaker is from Mind Research. Computer-based adaptive learning systems are being widely used in K-12, especially in math and science. But there are questions. Might adaptive learning systems lower student motivation, limit critical thinking, and dramatically reduce student perseverance when faced with a challenge? Given that most STEM employers are looking for highly motivated critical thinkers who can persevere to solve challenging problems, the question on how adaptive learning is impacting students must be addressed. Enjoy Mythbusters Adaptive Learning Edition with Nigel Nisbet, Director of Content Creation at Mind Research Institute. Help me welcome Nigel.
Thanks, Randy. Good morning. So if I can summarize our discussion from earlier this morning when Dan was talking to us, it would appear that you have two major competing challenges. You have, obviously, you have a vision of what learning should be, but you have test scores for which you're accountable. And, of course, you've got money pressures to actually make this happen. And it's interesting that we're a software company. We design software. The first question we normally get asked when we go out to speak to people is your software adaptive? And my general response is, who cares? It seems to be the buzzword at the moment, this whole notion that, wow, the software has to be adaptive, that's what's so cool. And yet, it's almost on the threshold of that, is the learning rich, or is it going to be to pass test scores? So I'm going to start somewhere completely different. I'd just like you to take a little look at the screen up here and just read this question and just think about it for a moment. And you can laugh, it's perfectly okay. So if you've seen this before, please don't tell anybody the answer. Before we answer the question, I have a question about it. Can someone tell me what's challenging about this question? What's difficult? What's challenging about it? And you can shout that out if you've got any thoughts. Okay, there's a visual picture that you're trying to put together. If I go south, east, and north, what's difficult about this? Is this trivial? What's going on? You don't get back to the same place, kind of. Like, is the question wrong? Am I crazy? Did I put this up here by mistake? Does anybody know what the answer to this question is? Someone just said it. I heard it right here. What color is the bear? White. And why is the bear white? Because you're at, where is that? The North Pole. So just think about that for a moment. If you were at the North Pole and you went 1 mile south, then you went 1 mile, in fact, either east or west, and then go back up north, you end up back where you started. So the interesting thing here, it's interesting you mentioned this visual picture. What's challenging about this question is that you have to reframe in your mind what the question is asking. You're challenged. No one lowers the bar for you. You have to figure out, how is this question working? And when you do, you suddenly start to see the world in a new way. So some of you may have come across this before. There's a professor, in fact, he's Indian, but actually teaches in Newcastle University in England. He decided to put computers in the slums in India. And they literally built what they called holes in the wall. These computers were there. The kids could access them. Nobody told them what they were. Nobody told them what they were for. They were literally told, play with these things. And he wanted to see what would occur. Anybody want to take a guess? This guy actually won the TED Prize, $1 million this year, to continue this research. Anybody want to take a guess as to what happened? Did the kids destroy the computers, or what did they do? They figured them out. These kids were surfing the web. Within a few months, they'd figured out how to do this. They'd risen to that challenge. No one taught them how to do this. They figured it out for themselves. And before we sort of start getting terrified that, oh my God, these kids are going to be amazing and we're never going to compete, here's actually something that happened in the US. I have a 2-year-old who did exactly the same thing. He is now doing more of this. I'm sure many of you have children and grandchildren who you've observed precisely this thing going on. And the interesting thing there is they learned this by themselves. These tools weren't even designed for kids their age, but they've been able to figure this stuff out. They've done things and they've figured it out for themselves, all without the bar being lowered, very interestingly. So I want to sort of dig into that a little bit and just shout out some stuff. When you think of student-centered learning, what do you think of? What's the sort of things that you think of in terms of activities? Any thoughts, words? Student-centered learning. Students in control, okay, absolutely. In fact, that's actually one of the most critical pieces right there. We'll come back to that later. Any other things? Sorry, I got 2 things at once. Differentiated? Self-directed learning, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. These are all true. Any other sorts of things? Creativity, absolutely. Sorry, learning experience. Authentic learning experience and collaborative. And this is great. This is exactly what we think of when we think of student-centered learning, and student-centered learning is obviously a powerful thing. I'm sure none of you imagined student-centered learning would look anything like this. This is a French artist's vision from 1910 as to what education would look like in the year 2000. And the rather terrifying thing is, it's very scarily similar, if you think about what's going on here, to what we actually see in a lot of places. The notion here is that the teacher is the dispenser of knowledge. It all goes into a machine, and it gets piped perfectly into each individual student's head right at the right moment, and they're all learning. And oftentimes, if you think of the way that our sort of traditional adaptive computer systems are designed, this is pretty much it. The idea is that there's this one-to-one relationship between the student and the computer system. There is no self-directed learning going on. The computer system decides, oh, you're not ready for this, yes, you are ready for that. There's no sense of, I'm going to leave you struggle with this challenge for some time, and you're going to figure it out. It's like, no, you can't do that yet, you have to do this now. This is kind of what we're doing. It's completely in contrast to everything that you know is actually good pedagogy. And it's remarkable how we can, on the one hand, put such effort into professional development to develop good pedagogy for our teachers, and then sometimes when we're looking at computer systems that we're going to put in place, all of those rules seem to completely fly out of the window. And we get questions like, is it adaptive? As though that was somehow the most important thing. Whereas the most critical thing, just like in the classroom, should be, are the students learning? How does it push them to think critically? And it would be great if those were the most sort of common questions that we get. So adaptive learning systems have been around for a long time. This is a little chart here, a somewhat worrying chart, of expenditure on technology versus test scores. And that's NAEP test score data. So this is not sort of some random stuff that I pulled out of thin air. And anybody notice a difference between the two curves? Is there much of a difference? One is basically exponential, and the other is a little flat, maybe rising slightly, which is cool. And the problem here is not that technology doesn't have unbelievable potential. It does. We see it used in so many other ways. We know there's a potential here. But unfortunately, most people use technology in such a limited way. When they're thinking about what is actually going to go into the learning experience, the way that technology is used in that experience is often very limited, and hence, there's not really much change. So I'm going to go very, very quickly through a description of kind of a process of thinking about learning, which may help to sort of guide your vision in terms of designing learning processes and evaluating even learning systems. We have something we call a learning path that helps us think about, when we're putting learning experiences together for kids, what are the critical elements of that experience that kids need to really learn deeply. All learning begins with experience. And this is really based upon very clear neuroscience. There's a point at which you have a perception-action cycle that kicks in. So, for example, if you grab a rock that is hot, your brain perceives the heat, you respond to it, and there's this learning from that experience that critically begins this learning path. The same thing needs to be true whether you're learning math or anything else. You have to begin with some kind of experience that gives you something about the actual thing you're learning at hand. Then you need to connect the experience to prior knowledge and other things that you've got already in your mind. Then there is absolutely a time for practice. And once you've done all of these things, you're in a position to apply that learning to the world around you. Unfortunately, most classrooms look something like this. We don't generally give kids much experiential learning. Maybe in elementary grades, maybe there's some hands-on manipulative work, but for the most part, kids are told how to do something about here, and then given plenty of opportunity to practice. That's something that's actually happening fairly well in most classrooms. And then there's some limited application type of stuff that occurs. The problem is that adaptive learning technology pretty much does exactly the same thing. So if this is already what's happening in a typical classroom, replacing it and using technology to basically do the same stuff is really not doing a huge deal of, not going to engineer much change, which is why we're not seeing that huge change in scores. And the other problem here is that for the most part, this shouldn't really be called adaptive learning, because what's really going on, it's really adaptive practice. And there's a place for that. There's a place for this kind of practice activity, but to mistake practice for learning is a very, very big problem. Because what we really need to do, we need to think about how can we use technology not just to increase the bits that are already occurring in the classroom, but how can we use it to actually work at this end here and bring up the experience and the connections that kids need to really learn. And obviously, that's one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about. This is what we want learning to look like. We want learning to look that cool. I want to be able to, and I do, have the pleasure of walking into schools and classrooms, and if I was to ask students, why are you doing this? The general answer I'll get will be, because this is fun. And it's not fun to them in some trivial surface way of like, oh yeah, it's kind of fun. No, it's fun because of that. Because they rose to a challenge and they achieved that challenge. And literally, learning becomes fun. The notion of producing lifelong learners is not going to become if learning becomes this thing that I'm just doing to achieve short-term goals. Lifelong learning comes from that joy of figuring things out, that moment of, wow, that was really difficult. Nobody made it easier for me. I took time, I thought about it, and I figured it out. At the end of the day, all of the problems that you guys are faced with on a daily basis are not problems that have simple solutions. They're problems that have multiple facets to them that are incredibly challenging that no one's figured out before. That's the type of thinking that you get paid to do. And that's the type of thinking that all of our students ultimately need to come out of school prepared to do. So teaching them with a system that basically says, oh, you're finding this a bit difficult, let me make it easier for you, that isn't what you guys are faced with on a day-to-day basis. In fact, it's what nobody is faced with on a day-to-day basis. We need kids to rise. We need to challenge them, and we need to have them rise to that challenge. And that's what, obviously, excitement in learning is all about. Okay, we're going to play a game, very simple game. Again, it's going to require you to do some visualization. There's a penguin. Does anybody know the penguin's name? There we go, Gigi, yes. I left LAUSD school district. I taught high school for many years and was a district administrator in Los Angeles and left to work with a penguin called Gigi, which is an interesting concept. But I design games with Gigi. So the objective of this game is very simple. Gigi is over here, kind of like this. Whoops, sort of like that. It'll teach me to have a bad knee. And what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how are we going to rotate Gigi to get Gigi to look like this. And how many moves have I got? 3. Does it say that on the screen? Does it have words there telling you how many moves you have? No. Do you need them? No. You've got a choice here of any of these 6 moves. How far is any one of these moves going to rotate Gigi? Say it again. Quarter turn, absolutely. Again, there are no words, there's no instructions, you're just challenged to think. So, all right, who's feeling brave? Anybody want to give me a move? Being wrong is fine, by the way. There's no penalty. No one will ever know. It's totally fine. Give me a move. Second one, all right. Nothing happened. This does not mean you're wrong. Why do you think nothing happened? You've got to do them all in your head. You have to visualize the entire solution, and then you get to see whether you're right. Okay, so think about it now. Gigi has gone, and we would have basically made Gigi do this. So what do I need to do now? Turn him twice. Which one do you think we should do? Number 4, let's try it out. So 1, 2, oh, it's looking good. There you go. Give yourselves a round of applause. Fantastic. Good job. Excellent. You are now officially as smart as first grade students. This is awesome. So, yeah, we get first grade kids can do this. All of them. Now, they don't start with 3. They start with making 1 move, and we gradually build them through a learning path. But the point is, kids can do this. It's amazing what, if they're given a challenging environment and pushed to work with it, especially because there's feedback. The interesting thing, of course, if they get it wrong, let's have a look at this. If they get it wrong, let's just say let me hope I'm actually going to get this wrong. I think that'll be wrong. Let's say I did this. Notice, it doesn't say, do you want a hint? It doesn't say, oh, this question looks a bit difficult for you, let's go back and do an easier one. No, I get the same thing again, but I saw precisely why it was that what I did wasn't correct. There was informative feedback. These are the important things when we're learning, not whether or not it's going to ask me easier questions if I get stuck. Because if you think about it, the moments when you get stuck, that's the magic moment right there. That's the moment where there's a challenge, there's something that you don't understand. That's the moment when teachers are perfectly placed, not to tell the kids the answer, but what should they do? If a kid is working on this and gets stuck and is struggling, what should teachers do to support them? And the answer is not tell them the answer. Ask questions. Exactly. That's the whole skill right there, is ask the kids questions. What are you thinking? How do you think? So suddenly you have tools around which to do that type of thing, which is always very exciting. So this is very simple. I don't know if anyone's feeling super brave. Might just have to be a little careful with time. This is another very interesting puzzle, and I'm sure this is a lot of fun for me to play. But in the interest of time, I was going to maybe hand this around, but I think we'll get to more interesting discussion a little bit later on. So this program is not something that is born out of a whim. When we're talking about the fact that we have researched how learning occurs and how to design programs to maximize that learning for kids, this comes actually out of very serious research at the University of California, Irvine, and this is something that's been in development for the last 18 years, beginning as a summer project that our founder thought would take 2 months, and he'd be done designing some math games to help kids learn math, and 18 years, he's still going, and we're still going into this. So this is something that's heavily research-based. Research is literally our middle name. And it's something that we're ongoing performing that research to figure out how to maximally help kids learn mathematics. One of the things we do is we will begin all mathematics visually, and we'll gradually take kids on a learning path that introduces the symbols in the mathematics until they're eventually solving problems that look exactly the same as they will see on any assessment and see on any test, but the kids know what it is that these things refer to. So one of the interesting questions here that came up earlier was this feeling that there's a dichotomy between how you'd ideally like to teach students and success on tests. There shouldn't be. If kids are being taught well and they understand math, they will do well on assessments, and we do have the data to back it up, and I'm happy to discuss that later on, and we're more than happy to share all of that with any of you at any point during this week. Because interestingly, if kids understand math deeply and they can solve problems, it's remarkable how that does actually translate into better standardized test scores, and especially with Common Core coming up, this is something we've seen a lot of very, very interesting results at scale in many parts of the country. So, more challenges for you guys. This isn't all, I apologize for the amount of math that's going on this morning, but actually I don't. What am I saying? I love math. Are you kidding? I don't apologize at all for the amount of math that's occurring. This is good. This is what we should be doing. So give me some words. What does division mean? Some words that are synonymous with division. What do we mean by division? Split up evenly. Okay, cool. I like it. Anything else? Some other words for split up evenly? Any other? Groups. Yeah, okay. This is good. Yeah, absolutely. I thought, break down, yeah, absolutely. So these are good. So splitting up evenly, putting into groups, this is often how we'll begin teaching kids about division. Perfectly good idea. Here are 6 things, put them into 2 different groups. Great idea. And then, of course, somewhere around about 6th grade, we then ask them this type of question. And now we're saying, oh, we've got half a group. What's division by a fraction? Can anyone give me a colloquial, what does that mean? It's a little tougher, isn't it? Does anybody have a phrase they remember from school about how to divide by fractions? Yeah, multiply by the reciprocal. Anybody know a sort of more colloquial phrase, R's not to reason why? Just invert and multiply. Basically, division by a fraction means nothing, so therefore we have to invent some language to tell us what it means. But one of the reasons that people think it means nothing is because of the way that they were taught what division was in the first place. So one of the things that we do is we think, what are the actual real, what we call schema? What are the ways that kids need to understand the mathematics that won't run out on them 2 years later? So for example, if you're learning about numbers and you learn to count, and you go 1, 2, 3, and you think, wow, I got all the numbers down, I can add, I can multiply, I can do all this stuff with numbers, and someone says, what's 3 minus 5? And your only answer is, well, that doesn't exist, my teacher said that it's impossible to do. You've got a problem. You've learned something so strongly, and suddenly you've developed this schema in your mind which now is almost running up against a brick wall because you haven't been taught flexibly enough to think about numbers in depth. Similar thing happens with division and fractions, where you learn so much through concrete sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and counting, and somebody says, well, now what about all the stuff in between? Very, very, very tricky. So part of our task is how do we make rich, interesting schemas that build students' understanding in a way that carries through. So we're going to do this in the next 3 minutes, all right? You're going to learn what division by fractions and division in general is all about. And you're going to do it with peanuts and elephants, because obviously that's all about division. It just makes so much sense that elephants and peanuts is obviously going to be about division. So here's a game. I've got some elephants. How many elephants have I got? 3. All right. Oh, dear. Don't like that. And I got some peanuts. So we're starting in a very traditional way. If we were to use the splitting them up equally model, how many peanuts would each elephant get? 2. Great. We are showing first grade students have got nothing on us. We're all there. Absolutely. But you're right. 2 is correct. So, but there's another way of thinking about this. Imagine I had to build a sort of proto-elephant stamp. Okay? So over here, the way that we have the kids answer this question is to say, why don't you tell me, basically, how many peanuts one elephant would have? And there's a really, this might sound subtle. You might be like, what the heck is he talking about? This is math. This is in the morning. I don't know why this is happening to me. But this is actually really cool and very, very interesting. So just kind of hang with me for a minute. So we're saying, when you're thinking about division, the way we want you to think about it is to say, how much would one elephant have? And in this case, even our sharing model works. One elephant would have 2 peanuts. And so if we stamped out that elephant, I know they're a bit funky looking, but bear with it, all the peanuts go away, and the penguin, whose name is able to cross the screen. Okay, so next problem. Same number of peanuts, slightly different number of elephants. How many peanuts should I give a proto-elephant over here? 3. Absolutely. So when I stamp it out, it's going to create a stamp, 3 and 3, boom. There it goes. The elephants eat the peanuts, and Gigi can cross the screen. Okay, this is great. This is so easy. So now I have 1 elephant. So how many peanuts do I need to give my 6? Yeah. Who knew math could be so simple? Okay, and now I have, how much of an elephant do I have now? Half an elephant. But now, think about it. The way that we've learned about this is I'm building a stamp. So I don't want you to think math. I want you to visualize. Just look at that half an elephant. Imagine those 6 peanuts going into this half of the elephant, and tell me how many peanuts would I need to put in a whole elephant. Let's visualize. Imagine, so see this half of the elephant over here, this white half of the elephant. These 6 peanuts are going to go, and they're going to go in that half of the elephant. So now, visualize how much would have to go in a whole elephant if 6 of them are here? 12. Interesting. So by thinking of it as a stamp for the whole elephant, we've just now done division by fractions. And for those of you that do remember hours not to reason why, just invert and multiply, what's the reciprocal of a half? 2. And 2 times 6 is 12. Ta-da! It works. So this is how we do math. This is how we build students along these learning paths. We get them to actually think about what is fundamentally happening. And then once they've done that, then we start bringing them towards doing this symbolically. We don't leave them hanging just at the conceptual place. So here, for example, now they have to build, what does 4 divided by 1/3 mean? So 4 means I have to take 4 peanuts. And then we have the kids actually use these tools to say, well, 1/3 means I have to take this much of the elephant, except, there we go. And now I need to take 1/3 of it. So they're building a representation of what the symbols mean. So they're going from symbols to visual, and then they have to answer that question. And what's the answer to this question? Deathly silence. 12 as well. Yeah, there we go. See, we kept it simple. just visualize. And eventually, in a learning path like this, the students would end up at a place where they're seeing precisely the same question that they would see on a standardized test. So the whole point is here, there doesn't have to be a dichotomy between kids being good at standardized tests, 5 divided by a quarter, 20, I heard it, I'm going to go with it. Okay, there doesn't have to be a dichotomy between kids being able to do this type of question and actually the rich learning experience that revolves around being challenged, being thought about thinking deeply. These things can actually be the same. It just requires it's a deep design process. This is a non-trivial thing to produce. But the results we produce are very, very exciting. So learning can look fun, it can look interesting, but it can also be very, very deep and very, very exciting. So from our perspective, there are 3 keys to any instructional software. And you'll notice that adaptivity is not going to be listed here. First thing is interactivity, and I'll come back to that in a moment. One of the biggest is there has to be informative feedback. You saw in every single thing we did here, you tried something out, and if it didn't work, you saw why, precisely why, it was wrong. There's no multiple choice, there's no, yes, that was right, no, that was wrong. You see why, precisely why things were wrong. And finally, it's all about building students' intrinsic motivation. Very, very critical point, and this is one of the problems with adaptive learning, is that it kills intrinsic motivation. Adaptive learning generally gives that relationship between the student and the computer where they're aware that the computer is in control of the learning process as opposed to them being in control of the learning process. And just a little word about interactivity. I had the dubious pleasure of looking at a tablet-based program put out by one of the large publishers that was supposedly interactive. And it was, in some respects, interactive. The kids could watch videos, which is not really very interactive, but they are interacting with a device. But there's really nothing going on apart from a one-way flow of information. And they also were able to do stuff like this. They had a graph thing, and they could basically draw a graph. The only problem with it was that they could draw anything. And for any of you who are mathematicians, this is obviously not a meaningful graph. In fact, what they've done is they've reinvented graph paper and put it on a tablet, which might be a little bit more convenient in terms of carrying it around, but this is not a real interactive use of technology. This is, in fact, pretty lame. This is, at no point am I even learning that what I'm doing here is wrong. I'm just basically given a tool that, sure, if I get it right, looks very, very nice, but really the question is, what happens when I do something that shouldn't be allowed? And this is not interactive. You really have to dig deep and look at the stuff that you're thinking about getting and say, okay, what's it going to tell my students when they do something wrong? What's going to happen? What's going to be the learning experience that they're going to get out of this? And oftentimes, there's a lot of very, very surface material out there that really isn't digging very deep. This is what graphing could look like. So here's an activity, another game. Very simple. I've got to burst some balloons. That sounds like fun. So I just kind of drag these things to figure out how to burst these balloons. So that's great. Doesn't seem like I'm even learning. I mean, really, all I'm doing is moving this stuff around to burst some balloons. Can anyone tell me what shape or what type of curve I'm creating here? Parabola, absolutely. And in fact, this game is called Parabola Balloons, really inventive naming system that we have. And of course, it's not too hard, and we have a whole learning path for that too, to get to the point where the students are doing something like this, where let's say, for example, I really was not quite sure how this worked, and let's say I graphed it like this, and I'm dragging these balloons onto the graph, and I think, yeah, this is what this looks like. I see why I was wrong. And in fact, I'm precisely able to then go back and go, I see what I had to do. I had to put these things here. And suddenly I'm beginning to build a learning experience, which hopefully I will get right now. There we go. Fantastic. So this is what interactivity can look like. And that's what it really, really, really needs to be. So our mission, we're a non-profit company, and our mission is very simple. It's to ensure that all students are mathematically equipped to solve the world's most challenging problems. Pretty simple. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Yeah, no, this is a big deal. This is something that's going to drive our vision for probably a long, long time. In talking to Matthew recently, who's the founder of our company, I think we worked out that I'd be 55 by the time we finished building calculus. So that was a little scary, but this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're engaged in, and this is where we need to get students. We need to get kids. You get good at problem solving by solving problems. You get good at rising to challenges by rising to challenges. And you get good at doing this by actually being thrust and thrown into that challenge from the earliest possible age. So having first graders solve complex problems about rotation is an awesome way to start. And that's kind of how we move through the rest of... At the moment we have K-5, we're building middle school, and then building high school. And we have the test data to back this up. This is not a complex run-through of our test data. This is a nice, big, shiny-looking graph with lots of stuff on it. But any of us who are here would be more than happy to go into any detail about test data, what that looks like. A couple of really important things about it. This is something that we're seeing happening at scale across districts. This is not something where we're claiming a result based upon, oh, we had 2 teachers over here that did really well with this program. That's not the sort of data we're talking about. We're talking about data that have moved, for example, school districts like Santa Ana in Orange County from, as an entire district, from 30 points behind the state to level with the state in elementary math, as in closed the achievement gap over a 5-year period. This is not flash in the pan, but this is something very serious, very rigorous that's occurred over a long period of time. We have well over 500,000 students using the program now across the country. This is just a little snapshot of some larger implementations. But all of this data effectively is control group of schools not using the program versus large group of schools using the program. For example, this is LAUSD. 10,000 students are in this implementation. So this is, again, large-scale data. And all of these data points are on state tests in the different states. It doesn't matter what the test is. If kids understand math, they will do well on assessments. The key is if they understand math. Is a very challenging thing to do. But that's what we're in the business of doing. That's what we love to do. My job, in fact, actually is not talking to people. I don't get let out very often to do that anymore because we're designing and building middle school and 6th grade programs at the moment, and a lot of my time is spent managing the design team and actually building these games. But I do like getting out from time to time and talking about it, which is kind of fun. But there are many, many critical things occurring right now, obviously. We've got Common Core coming in, and one of the big focuses, obviously, is on STEM, of which math is, to some extent, the fundamental underlying critical component. So much of what we're doing is about helping students have this piece of the STEM equation, which can then obviously support everything else that's in this critical learning path. So I'm going to throw it open for questions. This is what learning can look like. This is what kids can look like when they're seriously engaged. I'd be delighted to take any questions from anybody, and thank you very much for your time. Can I repeat the 3 keys? Absolutely, I can repeat the 3 keys, most definitely. All right. Interactivity. But be real careful with that one. Watching a video is not an interactive learning experience. But, you know, just because you're pressing a button and you're interacting with a machine doesn't mean that the learning is interactive. But interactivity is critical. Informative feedback is unbelievably important. If you didn't have informative feedback about the things that you do on a daily basis, you would not learn. So that's really also key. And then this whole notion of intrinsic motivation. Badges and awards are okay. But what you really want is kids to be developing a love of learning for themselves, not learning because, oh, I got some badge on a website. That's so trivial, so surface, so not about the real depth of learning. So thank you. Any other questions? Oh, think I see a hand back here.
Your early research connected math learning with music. Is there
Yes.
still that connection?
Ah, fantastic. Yeah. So our early research, in fact, the beginnings of our company grew out of the research that somebody else kind of spun off into what ended up calling the Mozart effect. But it was actually one of our company's founders' initial research that was that research that formed the basis of that. And we still find a huge link between music and math, and we actually have a music program that runs along K-5 with the math program. We love it when schools and districts decide to do both together. We have support for that. We have materials for that. One of the things we find in the sort of current economic climate is that sadly music is something that's often squeezed out of what schools are able to do, which we feel is a real shame. But you do need a qualified music instructor to be able to do the math and music portion of the program together. But we are, if anybody is interested in doing that, we are always delighted to be able to support that, because there is a real link between that sort of, I myself actually, believe it or not, was once upon a time a musician. I still have the hair to prove it. And also a mathematician. And there is a very, very strong link between the type of thinking, the nature of being able to see things abstractly and develop all kinds of brain processes that go between the two. So yes, big strong link. We'll love it when schools do both programs together. Sadly, we don't see that everybody's able to do that as much as they might have done once upon a time.
Yeah, it would seem to me that the same principles apply to literacy as well, and the idea of students constructing meaning and becoming interactive. Are there any plans to move in that direction beyond just mathematics?
So what an excellent question. I think I mentioned earlier that Matthew and I had worked out that I'd be 55 by the time we finished calculus. So by the time we've done the rest of it, I'll probably be 70. But yeah, we'd love to. Obviously, science is probably the next step after mathematics. But you're absolutely right. The same principles apply. It all comes down to good pedagogy at the end of the day. It's very simple. I think somebody earlier said, we do know what that looks like. The problem is, it's really difficult to do it well. But it's not that there's a secret as to what good teaching should be or how to get students, constructing their answers. This is all very known. The challenge isn't so much that we don't know what to do. The challenge is actually making it happen. And then, of course, the other challenge is using technology to support the bits that teachers actually struggle with, rather than using technology to basically replicate the bits that they already do fairly well, which the fact that they do it fairly well means that that's what most people think teaching is. Therefore, it's not surprising that most technology is designed to do the same thing. But when you take a step back and look at it in a broader perspective, for language as well, what we really want then are programs that support that end of it. We'd love to go there. It's not going to happen probably in the immediate future. We've got a lot of things to do, as everybody in our company well knows. When did we say we were going to have Algebra 1 ready? I forget, but it was probably last week, I think. But this is, it's so difficult to do this stuff. This is not something that you can just throw together in an afternoon. This is something that takes time to build, to do it well. But great question, thank you. Any other questions?
What grades? What grades?
Oh, excellent question. So the question was basically what grade levels is this sort of data, and as I said, this is not a hard data chart. This is a nice looking graph, but this is all K-5. So we are currently building middle school. We have a middle school intervention program, but right now the full on-grade level Common Core Align program is all K-5, and that's where the data is from currently. But yeah, good question. Any other questions? Oh, I mean, is there our kids? Yes, absolutely. So we have some very interesting data, again, mainly from places in California, because that's places where schools have been using the program long enough to see kids that have been, and yes, absolutely, we see transfer into 6th and 7th grade scores and so forth and so on, absolutely. It's a little harder for us to quantify because there's obviously migration, not all the kids go to the same thing. The one challenge we have, it's very difficult for us to track data student by student. Now, we do have districts now that are working with us to actually give us by student data, but for a long time, all we're able to do is track like whole grade levels at a school, basically publicly available information. So it makes it much more challenging to track that kind of longitudinal stuff once they leave our program. But yes, we are seeing in places where we have basically wall-to-wall coverage, we can make some reasonable assumptions then about what's happening because every student went through the program. So yes, absolutely we're seeing that, very much so. Great question. Any other questions? I think we're good to go. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and hope you enjoy.